Let me ask you a question. Do autistic people feel empathy? That's what we're going to talk about today. So this idea that autistic people don't feel emotions at all, including empathy, has been floating around for decades, and there are some good reasons why. There are some informative reasons why. I'm not going to say they're necessarily good ones. So there is a researcher called, is he a professor or a doctor? He's definitely a doctor. I think he's a professor. We'll call him Professor Simon Baron-Cohen. Now, if you recognise that name, you've probably seen the movie Ali G, because Sacha Baron Cohen played Ali G. I think there's something in the water over there at the Baron-Cohen household. They're cousins. But anyway, so Simon, Dr. Simon Baron-Cohen, he was part of a research team. He's done a lot of research since and prior, and there are a lot of other big names, but that's the one that most people are aware of. He and colleagues came up with this theory that mentalizing, so the idea that you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes and understand what they think and what they feel, is something that autistic children learn later than non-autistic children. And they found this when they did a study, and I think the study had like 20 or fewer children in it. It wasn't very big. It was the Sally Ann experiment. And basically they did a role play with two dolls, one called Sally, one called Anne, and Sally left the room and Anne had a ball that they'd been playing with together. She hid the ball in a box and then she went out the room, and then she came back and Sally came back, and the children will ask, where will Sally look for the ball? Right? And all of the children, because they'd seen the ball get put in the box, they said, oh, she'll look in the box, because they don't understand the idea that Sally doesn't actually know, because Sally wasn't there. The child watching was there, but Sally wasn't, and so Sally's not going to know where the ball is. And there was multiple hiding places that could have been chosen, and all of the children of a very young age would say the box is where Sally would look. And so they did this study with autistic children and non-autistic children, and they did it of varying ages, like 3 and 5 and 7 and or whatever, and they found that generally speaking autistic children took longer, as in they were an older age when they were finally able to recognize, well, Sally wasn't there, so Sally doesn't know. Basically the conclusion that was drawn from this study was that autistic children struggle with empathy because they learned it later. And then this turned into the theory of mind, which was about emotional states and thoughts and beliefs. The idea that autistic children struggle to know what somebody else is thinking or believing or feeling. And this was connected with a lot of different studies where they did brain scans, they did observations, they did lots of different studies to try to work out if this is the reason that social behaviour is different in autistic children and autistic people in general. And there were some studies that confirmed what was found, and there were some studies that kind of didn't. This theory was very popular in the 90s because it was thought that you could probably trace back a lot of the impairments seen in autistic people to the inability to understand other people's thoughts and emotions. Now, it has been discredited. My kind of suspicion is that that autistic people might struggle to read other people's faces and body language and social behaviour more than struggling to understand it. I think if somebody tells you, if you're autistic and somebody tells you how they feel, then you're going to be able to understand it because they've told you, but you're not going to be able to guess it from a bizarre set of facial expressions and stuff, because to autistic people it's harder to read, you know. So I mean, that's my thought on it. Don't know whether that's true. There are some studies where they looked at that and they found that that didn't explain the impairment that we're seeing and the delay in empathy that was being recorded. And so they continued with this theory because the evidence that they'd found from the studies that they'd done to test it seemed to confirm the idea. And then they came up with the empathizing-systemizing theory, which is built on theory of mind and kind of was designed to sort of take its place, I guess. And it's the idea that autistic people are designed to systemize and non-autistic people are designed to empathize, and that this is gendered. And by that I mean that men are more prone to systemize and women are more prone to empathize. So even within the non-autistic community, men still systemize a bit, women empathize more than they systemize. And then if you look at the autistic community, men and women both systemize, but the men probably systemize more and the women systemize but also a little bit of empathizing. And so they kind of suggested that it was a neurotype thing, and that it's just how you're designed. And they linked this to the theory of the extreme male brain, which is the idea that this relationship with systemizing, it's because autistic brains are hyper-masculinized due to more testosterone during pregnancy, being in the womb. The brain developed in a more masculine, a more male way, and so as a result autism happened, because autism is about having a man brain. I'm not sure if you can tell my contempt for that theory. I think it's highly flawed. There are a lot of problems with it, and one of the problems is the idea that empathizing is inherently female and systemizing is inherently male. I just realized I didn't explain what systemizing is. Systemizing is where you try to find systems in the world around you. So maybe you want to learn a language because there are grammatical rules, and the rules create a system. The rules are a system. They decide when you can use certain words and certain sentence types and stuff like that. Another example would be coding languages. Again, language, systems, rules. Music has rules and systems. Maths, physics, you know, basically STEM, STEM subjects. So yeah, so the idea is that STEM, systemizing, that sort of thing is more for men, and empathizing and social skills is more for women, and that's why autistic people are impaired in their social behaviour. Now, I really disagree with that. If that's the case, that's because of Western gender roles that have taught us to go in one direction or the other. You know, traditionally, like a couple hundred years ago, systemizing was for men because men were the only ones who worked. And in your everyday life, you don't need systemizing if you don't work. You know, in your everyday life, if you were a woman, chances are you might not be working in a highly skilled area like technology or science. You might have done farming or something, sure, and women did work, they could work, but like if we look at the higher class women, they generally just didn't work for the most part. And so they would be socializing a lot, they'd be spending time with other people, other women most likely, and so of course they're going to be more likely to empathize because that's a social thing. It's part of social bonding, and that's what they spend more time on. So I would argue that the whole men systemize, women empathize is mostly just a gender role thing about what we push people to do and what we teach our children to do. So the extreme male brain thing, I don't agree that autism comes from having a manly brain. I just don't. Yeah, okay, so maybe there's science that confirms that parts of the brain respond to testosterone, and so on a neurological level, if the science proves it, the science proves it, but I just don't think that it's masculinity that we're finding. But anyway, so that's empathy, that's systemizing, that's a quick history of where that comes from. Now, is it true? I don't think so. If you follow researchers like Dr. Luke Bearden and Damien Milton, you'll know from their work in the last couple of years that they've postulated, they've come up with the idea that perhaps it's not that empathy as a whole is impaired with autistic people, but it's autistic people's empathy towards neurotypical people is impaired, but autistic people's empathy to autistic people is typical, and it's this idea that we have these two groups. We have autistic and we have non-autistic, and they don't empathize well with each other, and it's a two-way street. The empathy thing applies to neurotypical people too. It's a two-way street, and they both struggle to empathize with each other, but within their separate groups, autistic to autistic, neurotypical to neurotypical, they empathize just fine. And there have been recent studies. It's a new idea, and so there haven't been many studies yet, but there are studies that have confirmed this, that autistic people socialize and empathize just fine with other autistic people. So there's that. Now, do I think that empathy really is impaired in autistic people? No, I mean, I kind of agree and lean towards the theory that I just mentioned about it being a group dynamic within a group. But I think the problem isn't the empathy, because when people say empathy, they think about not just understanding other people's emotions, but caring about other people's emotions. And I know autistic people. I have autistic friends, I have autistic colleagues, I have autistic family and people online, and I know that they care a whole lot. I have literally had people crying to me because they care, but they don't know why somebody is upset or what they've done. They know that they've seen this person react to something that was said in a way that shows they're upset, but they don't know why. It's not the lack of caring, it's the lack of ability to read, as far as I'm concerned. But I also think that maybe it's quite individual, so it varies from person to person. So there may be some people who do struggle with it the way that Simon Baron-Cohen thinks, but I would imagine those are probably the minority. I'd be interested to hear what you think. Please let me know in the comments below. I really would like to hear from autistic people about this topic, and what do you think, and what is your experience of empathy in your life? Do you think that what I said was accurate for you about it being individual, and about it being about not being able to read people rather than not caring? What's your thought? Let me know in the comments. I hope this has been interesting. Thank you very much for listening. Bye.